Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor, as always, to be a part of the Democracy Group. Well, we haven't always been a part of the Democracy Group, but so that's why it's still an honor. When they asked us to be a part of it a couple of years ago, it is an honor to be a part of that network. And it's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And I say this all the time, but if you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go on there and subscribe. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. Go ahead and check out what we're doing. We're putting out all kinds of video up there. And we also still need reviews. I'll actually be sharing a couple of reviews today. So, maybe you'll get your name in on the record here. But that it really does help. All of it helps. So we can continue having these conversations, exploring big topics like the one I wanted to discuss today. And that is, how in the world can we engage with one of them? I will be talking about a number of different tools today for engaging with, one of those people, one of the people that think differently than we do, voted differently than we do, get different, have different news sources or whatever than we do. One of them, you know what I'm talking about. But like I said, it's been pretty cool. I had mentioned that we got a 3-star review. So a couple of people left us some 5 stars. So it's really cool. I want to give them some props. One, I don't know what this name is, but it's 33 money sign and 8. So I don't know. Maybe it's like code for easy 8. I don't know. Either way, it's really cool. Thank you so much for leaving the review. The Easy 8, for now, I'll refer to you, said, "This podcast gives voice to so many who love democracy and people over just hearing one opinion for life. This podcast is thoughtful, intelligent, respectful, and hopeful." I love it. Thank you, Mr. Nathan. And I'm not being falsely humble to say that it has mostly to do with the wonderful guests. I am right there with you. I think they're fantastic, and I'm learning so much along the way. So thanks for going on the ride with me. Another one came in from DP Lawrence, another 5-star review. DP Lawrence said, "One need not be religious nor deep into the weeds of politics to enjoy this podcast. The range of guests is wonderful, and the commentary is thoughtful." That's really meaningful. I really appreciate that. I put a lot of time into preparing for these things, and it's rough out there. So the work and the conversations really are meaningful, and especially meaningful hearing from folks who are listening and getting something from it. So really, thank you so much. Now, just to be fair, I won't say the name, but if you want to go on Apple, you can read it. But I did get the 3 stars. It's 3 stars, but you know what? It's a point well taken. So this person quoted something I said. When did capitalizing on devastating natural disasters to score political points become a thing? That's something I posed a couple of weeks ago when that's when the fires weren't even up by us. It was just the Pacific Palisades and Altadena. Now, they affected a lot of friends we knew. And as mentioned on the show previously, we have friends who lost their homes. A lot of people, including us, were displaced at different times. So this person answered that question, said 2005 Hurricane Katrina. I was 23, so that would have been my earliest recollection of it becoming a thing. It's a fair point. I deserve the 3 stars because you're right. I was being presumptuous in assuming that this is new. This level of making partisan points out of others' disasters is a new thing. No, but I take your point, and I should be a little bit more careful before I get carried away like that. So, for what it's worth, I've been joking around the last couple of weeks about getting a 3-star review, but it is constructive, so I do appreciate that. I'm appreciative for all of the reviews, all of the engagement, comments on YouTube, comments on other platforms. If you see us on Facebook and Threads and Blue Sky and even LinkedIn, anywhere that you engage, it's really meaningful to be in conversation, not just with the guests that come on the program, but the folks that are part of this community of people that are listening to the show. So thank you. So what I was saying before is, how do we do this thing? Somebody asked me a question. I was on somebody else's program just I think it was yesterday, and asked a great question like, how do you do it? Like, do you have certain tools or certain practices, certain ways that you go about this thing, certain mindset? It was a really good question, and I realized we don't really. This is what the show is about, and I have guests on all the time that I'm asking them what they think. How do we talk politics and religion without killing each other? And I realized that I haven't shared my own insights, what I've learned along the way so far. So I thought it'd be good to take some time to do just that. So I jotted down 7 tools and a little bit of extra credit for how I go into these conversations. And again, not being not being not putting on a disguise and pretending that I'm humble and I'm not the expert. I've been earnestly learning along the way, but at the end of the day, I'm a regular guy. I'm just a regular guy. I mean, look at me. I'm in the middle of trying to get a workout in, and whatever. I'm working. I'm doing this. I'm preparing, and I'm still trying to do all this stuff. And anyway, I'm just a regular guy, but I have been doing this now for over 4 years, and I've learned a few things. I've also continued to go into the fray and talk to people that I know I have deep, deep disagreements with. So here are some of the things that I've learned along the way. One is I've learned to give myself some grace as well as the other person some grace. Meaning, if we're just talking about the act and the art of engaging with people that have disagreements with us about religious issues, political issues, really important, deeply held beliefs, on any of these topics, we have to accept the fact that we're not going to get it right. We don't come into this thing with a third-degree black belt in how to talk politics and religion without killing each other. It just doesn't work that way. So I have to accept the fact that no matter how many David Brooks of the world and Monty Guzmans of the world, who I'll mention a little bit later, I talk to, I'm still not an expert at it. I'm still just a human. I still have proclivities. I still get pissed off. So I'm going to mess it up, but I'm going to keep on trying to get a little bit better next time, whether it's in that one conversation or overall. But I just have to be willing to know that up front, and allow myself those mistakes. Not that I'm looking to make mistakes, not that I'm looking to lose my crap and get angry at somebody and lose my temper. That's one of the ways, or get wrapped up in it and then be moody and be all up in my head for 3 days about something somebody said on Facebook or something. But I just have to know going in that I am not perfected, right? So, but what I would like to do is recognize when I do make some sort of a mistake in the way I approach someone and how I respond to someone, and to reckon with it and to try to get better at it. Not to get better at shooting somebody down or come up with a perfect comeback. That's not what this is about. I hope you know that by now. But it is about engaging more meaningfully in a relationship driven, with the goal being relationships as opposed to transactional. Something that is more relational than transactional. If that's the goal and I am just like shooting somebody down, I'm messing it up. There's all kinds of ways to mess it up. But the thing is, number one, give yourself grace. You're not going to get it right. You're just not going to get it right. And even if you do it for 5, 10, 15 years and you're still working towards that goal of being more neighborly, if you're Christian or Jewish, or you read the Bible, loving God and loving your neighbor, you're still human. You're not God, right? None of us are perfect. So allow for that fact. Give yourself grace. Give the other person grace too, because they're not God either. You may see the God in them, or at the very least, their humanity in them, but they're not perfect either. So give them a little bit grace that they're not going to mess it up. So grace, that's number one. Two is proper expectations. I've mentioned this before in conversations, on this on this show, as well as just in friends and family that I've talked about this stuff with. Is if your expectation is you're going to come in and you're going to drop the perfect zinger or the perfect comeback or send the exact right link to address what they're objecting to, and then all of a sudden they're going to see first of all, they're going to see your link and click on it, actually read what you send over to them, or they're going to see your snarky retort and be like, oh wow, that was so snarky and they nailed me, and they're all of a sudden going to wake up and be like, well, they're right. I better change my opinion on everything. It just doesn't work that way. So for me, what I've come to realize is that this is a process. It's a process. My expectation is not that I'm going to change somebody's mind 180 degrees. It's not that I'm going to turn them from somebody who sees me as an adversary into their best friend in one conversation. Nor is it that everybody I reach out to or try to engage with is going to be open to, having a conversation. You know, in all likelihood, I don't know if there's 1 out of 10 people that see me as an adversary that ends up engaging in a healthy way. That's a pretty good. It's not a good batting average in baseball, but it's a pretty good batting average for this thing. And 1 out of 10 people that I reach out to in this endeavor, usually it's a little bit more than that. If I do it in a spirit of neighborliness, I do have a higher batting average than that, but it ain't 10 out of 10. I'm telling you that. It's not 10 out of 10. And not only that, what I was saying before, once I'm in those conversations, whether it's an established relationship like a friend that I've been friends with my whole life, or somebody that I have a deep, meaningful relationship here, that we find that we butt heads over a certain issue or a certain politician or a certain theological premise, or a relative, I'm not going to change their mind. I've been having this conversation with my father for 25 years, about our whole life. But when I became a Christian in 2000, it really, that's when these types of conversations started happening. And we've had an effect on each other, but it's the conversation is the thing. It's not changing each other's minds. And yeah, we've persuaded each other. We've learned from each other over the years. And it was really hard in those first few years. But it's not about changing his mind to agree with everything that I think. That's not what it's about. It's about staying in the game is really what it's about. My expectation, if there is any persuasion that's happening, isn't going to change somebody's point of view on any one issue, let alone their whole worldview by 180 degrees, but by 1 degree. So not everybody's going to be responsive to being in these conversations. If you get 1 out of 10, you're doing pretty good. If you get more than 1 out of 10, you're doing really good. And if you have any sense of persuasion, if that's what one of your goals might be, it's 1 degree, not 180 degrees out of any given conversation. And the secret to that, the Jedi mind trick to that, or the reverse Jedi mind trick, I guess you could say, is that often people are more persuadable when you also are open to the possibility of being persuaded. It's this irony, it's this beautiful poetic irony. So, proper expectations, give yourself some grace, have the proper expectations. And then another big one is I've mentioned a couple times already having the perfect comeback. There's no perfect comeback. You might feel really satisfied by coming up with a perfect snarky smackdown, right? That's not a great way to go into these conversations. A much more effective way to go into these conversations for both parties is with a spirit of curiosity, of radical curiosity. So the best example I can use for that is, again, like if you're not Christian, even if you're not religious, you can look at Jesus as a historical character, or at least a literary character. And he obviously had a big impact on the world to this day, 2,000 years after the fact. So Jesus had a way of answering a lot of questions with questions, or opening up a can of worms with questions. By certain accounts, there's over 100 times throughout the gospel accounts where Jesus poses a question. Look, see, I'm still Jewish. I got a little phlegm. I got a little stuff. I'm talking about big ideas, and I'm burping. Anyway, that's just an aside. But while I'm talking about, I wonder, Jesus was Jewish. I wonder if he burped. Did, did you ever think about that? Like, if he was this perfect human, son of God and all that stuff, and God and man, all this, did he ever burp? I know he cried. I know he laughed. That's in the gospel accounts, but I wonder if he burped. Anyway, but in all seriousness, a lot of questions, at least over 100 times, if not 150 times throughout all the gospel accounts, he asks question. And I just picked out three. I didn't even get through, all of Matthew, let alone Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But I found a few that jumped out at me. And this is just a small sampling. At one point in Matthew 12, he's engaging with his disciples and also some other rabbis and teachers in a synagogue. And he said, somebody asked, somebody, his mother and his brother, his earthly mother and his brothers were outside and mentioned it to him while they were in the midst of this big theological, philosophical conversation, ethical conversation. And he goes, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And it just, can you imagine, like, in that time, in that place where family connections meant so much? Everybody was introduced as the son of this person, the brother of that person. The family connections meant everything. Even in the beginning of the Gospels, two of the Gospels lay out the filial line, the family line that ultimately led to Jesus, right? It was everything. But then Jesus is flipping this upside down and he's opening up like, whoa, I didn't think of that. Well, what do you mean by that? Who is my mother and who are my brothers? He asks. Big question, right? And it stops folks in their assumptions and gets folks to think about, wow, well, let's see. Let's really rethink something that we just thought was a big foundational pillar of how we think of ourselves, right? Big question. Another one I found, Jesus was with his disciples who they were they were really into the idea of the Messiah. They were really into the idea of this warrior Messiah. There were certain expectations from Torah and the histories and the other books of Hebrew Bible, that they were going to overcome their oppressors, that it was going to be they were going to have victory over their adversaries, and that the Messiah would look a certain way and go about it a certain way, and certain things weren't going that way. And it was very different than what Jesus was teaching and what he was modeling. And a question that he asked his disciples in this one account, this is in Matthew 16. He says, "What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul?" So Jesus was going about his mission in a very specific kind of way that was at odds with how his own disciples thought it would go. Very interesting, right? Big questions. He asked big questions that made his disciples rethink a lot of their own assumptions. And actually, that question is very apt for what's happening today. Do we go about figuring out how to live among each other through domination? Do we go about it through, do we give up what we know to be good and right and ethical and moral? Do we give that up because no, this time and our adversaries are so bad that this time calls for us throwing all of that away, and we can do all the things that we taught our kids not to do in kindergarten. We can celebrate these leaders who are everything that our kindergartners. So what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his own soul? Certain tactics that we're implementing. And listen, obviously I'm talking about certain leaders, I'm talking about certain extreme elements, right? But I'm guilty of it too. I really value peaceful relations. I really value certain things, but then something comes over me where I'm like, you know what? This guy just crossed the line, and I'm just going to beat him down, rhetorically beat him down. I'm going to do things and act in certain ways that I don't value, that go against the ideals, my own ideals, right? Because somebody crossed a certain line with me. Somebody's supporting things that are so bad and so destructive that it requires me to get away from my own compass of what I know to be ideal, what I know to be good. So I'm guilty of it too. So what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his own soul? But the point is, again, it's not these questions per se, but the fact that Jesus, a great teacher, a great example of a teacher, was asking questions in order to open up these areas of inquiry. One more I'll share with you. It's in Matthew 19. This rich young ruler came to Jesus and he said, "Teacher, what good thing shall I do so that I may obtain eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Why are you asking me about what is good?" Talk about opening up assumptions. Like, why do you think I would have the answer to that? And why are you asking me about what is good? So you don't have the answer to that? So Jesus answered a question with a question. And he wanted the person to, again, question their own assumptions that were baked into that question, right? So all that to say, these are just three illustrations and one character, one historical person that shared a great example of how to really engage on a deeper level. It's not by dropping a whole bunch of wisdom. It's not by sending a whole bunch of links. Read this article. He certainly made references to some great articles called the Hebrew Bible and Torah, but he so often, hundreds of times, more than 100 times, I think over 150 times, I think off the top of my head, ask the question, right? Asking a question in order to really engage with that person, in order to get that person to open up their own assumptions of what they're bringing to the conversation. But also, and here's the other thing, is that it allows that person, when we ask the right kind of question, it allows that person, instead of being in a posture of contentiousness, of combat, rhetorical combat, if we ask the right question, it opens that person up to telling the story. At the end of the day, what I'm going for, and one of the things that I'm going for is I don't want to see what this person knows so much as I want to see who they are. I want to see what their story is. I want to give them an opportunity to share their story. Again, we're storytelling creatures. One of my favorite books over the last couple of years, and I was fortunate enough to have David Brooks on the show after this book came out, is How to Know a Person. And I pulled a quote from something he said there. He said, he was referring to something he mentioned in the prior paragraph or sentence. He said, if you begin to regard storytelling as non-rigorous or childish, you constantly misunderstand people. If you overlook the profundity of storytelling. If you think it's childish, he says, you constantly misunderstand people. He went on to say, so when I'm in a conversation, this is David Brooks speaking, when I'm in a conversation with someone now, I'm trying to push against that and get us into narrative mode. I'm no longer content to ask, what do you think about X? Instead, I ask, how did you come to believe in X? That's a different question, right? Again, he goes on to say, this is a framing that invites people to tell a story about what events led them to think the way they do. Similarly, this is still Brooks speaking. Similarly, I don't ask people to tell me about their values. I say, tell me about the person who shaped your values the most. That prompts a story, right? So we're getting away from the contentious, oh, you believe that's wrong. Here's why. I believe this, and that's right, and here's why. That goes nowhere. It's two immovable forces, right? So this this allows you to see the human being as opposed to the facts, as opposed to the little rhetorical pieces of ammunition they're lobbing. It gets you away from getting caught up in the same kind of rhetorical combat, and then you see the humanity in them, and that person. There's nothing more powerful than feeling seen, right? And you want to, if you do want to, again, going back to being persuadable, a person being persuadable, when they feel seen, they're on much firmer ground, much in a much more secure place to be open to what you might have to say, right? And also they're more able to see you as a human being, not just a data point that they craft their own story about. Oh, well, this person voted for so and so, so they must be this, and this. Happens to me all the time. Frustrates the crap out of me. They know one thing. My family's from New York. Oh yeah, there's no real patriots from New York. Yeah, you can't possibly understand what real Americans are like. You're from New York and you've lived in yeah, whatever, dude. Like you see, I'm getting frustrated all just thinking about it. It happens to me all the time. There's one data point that somebody knows about me, and they jump to all kinds of other conclusions. They craft their own narrative about me. It happens not just me. It happens to all of us. and they put it on top of that person. They dehumanize that person by crafting a narrative that has nothing to do with anything other than their own imagination and assumptions that they've based on just this one data point, whether it's what shade my skin is, what color my hair is, where I'm from, what baseball team I root for, who they think I voted for president means I voted this way, that way, and this way on the propositions and all the other lines on the ballot. Yeah, you're not seeing somebody. But when you ask these kinds of questions and then allow someone, give them an opening and create a context for somebody to tell their story, that's a different that's a different conversation. You're seeing them as a human beings. Someone is seen. And even if that's not reciprocated, it's okay. You've already done a lot of work. You've seen another person, and another person has been seen, another human being on a human level. So again, I hope that I'm not going off the rails here and losing anybody, because I know I'm going into depth on each of these tools. But again, it's grace, giving yourself grace and the other person grace. You're going to screw this up. You're going to screw up these conversations. Having proper expectations. You're not going to change somebody's opinion by 180 degrees in one comment or even one conversation, but by 1 degree. And not everybody wants to even be in these conversations. If you have 1 out of 10 people that are open to it, great. Ask questions as opposed to dropping knowledge and sending the perfect link. Ask questions. A really famous person in history did, and that's Jesus. A lot of other people did too, obviously. And storytelling. So now storytelling, if you're asking the right questions and you're allowing someone to tell their story, the other disposition, the other posture, internal posture that is ideal is leaving room for the possibility that you'll arrive at some sort of mini epiphany, right, about that person, or mini epiphany about your own assumptions, that you're persuadable, right? The reverse Jedi mind trick I was talking about is not that you're going to convince them, but you're leaving room for the possibility that you can be persuaded about something, that you can learn something. You can arrive at what Mani Guzman calls in her book from a couple of years ago, I never thought of it that way. Or that leaving room for an I never thought of it that way moment, right? That you could get to a point, oh, wow, I didn't know that about you. That's interesting. Now I see why you feel that way about this particular proposition. Now I see why that's more important to you than this. Oh, I understand. I never thought of it that way. Again, it's good for you because you're learning something, you're growing, you're leaving the room for the possibility that this person isn't simply the only thing you need to know about them is you disagree on something and therefore they're your enemy and leave it at that. But maybe they're a human being and there's reasons for what it is that you're disagreeing on. But leaving room for the possibility that if you ask them questions, allow them questions that allow them to tell their story and share their story so that you can see them as a human being, and then also leave room for the possibility that you'll say, "Oh, wow, I never thought of it that way." So Mani has some, great talk about great knowledge. She has some great stories that she tells in her book. I never thought, and I'll put links to David's book, How to Know a Person, as well as Mani's book. It's called I Never, the title of her book is I Never Thought of It That Way. And Mani's coming back on the show in a few weeks, so I'm looking forward to that. But just a few gems that I pulled from I Never Thought of that book. One is treat their assumptions as questions. Because listen, they're a lot of people you talk to they come at these conversations assuming it's going to be rhetorical combat. It's going to be you think that way and I think this way, and we're going to have an argument and a debate, and it's going to be a contest. So like I was talking about before. They know I'm from New York originally, and grew up in Jersey, and they come to assumptions. So Mani's saying treat their assumptions as questions. So, oh, that's interesting that you think that. What made you arrive at that conclusion? Oh, you think everybody from New York votes a certain way? You think yeah, that's interesting. Treat their assumptions as questions. Oh, you think that I read books now means that I'm super. By the way, I don't know if folks know this. I'm not educated. I pretended to go to college for a semester and a half, and I'm not formally educated. I read a lot, so I guess I'm informally educated. But anyway, that's just an assumption a lot of folks make. It's cool when they do because they're thinking more highly of me than I deserve. But any kind of assumptions. But she says, Monica says, treat their assumptions as questions. And your assistant, she's referring to the assistant in our brain that does all this work and does what she calls chaining. Oh, well, what I was talking about just before. Oh, well, they're from New York, or they have they have lighter colored skin or they're blue eyes or gray hair, then they must this and they must that. And chaining. I thought of them as dominoes, like we come to all these other assumptions. But that's our internal assistant that's doing all that work for us to create a narrative, whether it's true or accurate or not, based on, one or two things that we make all these other assumptions about. So Monica says, treat their assumptions as questions, and your assistant will get quiet while you get curious. People are mysteries, not puzzles. This means we can never be sure about them, but we can always be curious. Later in that same chapter, she says, trying to inform, like trying to win, can get in the way of trying to listen. Once you drop anchor on a chunk of knowledge you think the other person is missing and try to make the conversation circle it rather than everyone's knowledge, you risk turning a bridging conversation into talking points trench warfare. When frustrated people start opening links, they're done opening minds. So she has some gems in there. One other one that I'll share with you. She says, in I think it's no, it's the next chapter. It's later in the book. Monica says, four characteristics I've learned make for not only better questions but much more fulfilling conversations. She calls it. She says, I call it the care check. CARE. If your question is curious, answerable, raw, and exploring, you're on the right track. Now, I won't go into her explanations of curious, answerable, raw, and exploring, but they're really good tools of asking good, healthy questions that open up for great conversations. Now, one other thing that's really hard, and honestly, I don't know what the answer to this is, but another tool that I've been working on is recognizing where your line is. A few times, and I've shared it on the show before, that I've had to love somebody, continue. I try to continue loving them, but I got to continue loving them from far away. And some people I just have to cut out. It's just so toxic. And I am not the person for them, and they are not the person for me. So I just have to completely cut them out. Now, I hate giving up on people. I always want to hold out hope for people, and I accept the fact that not every conversation is going to go well, and some people just don't want to talk about this stuff, and that's fine. But sometimes you got to recognize when somebody crosses a line. I shared just recently, there was one guy that he's just become radicalized. We used to have conversations about any number of things, including things that we disagreed on. I saw him more than 6 months ago now in Jersey for our reunion. We had shared a drink and, just pleasantries and whatever. But this guy, man, over the summer and then after the election has gotten radicalized. And I've been trying to do all this stuff. Like, dude, why do you feel so strongly about this? Why do you feel strongly about it? Asking him questions. And he always answered me as if he thought that I was fighting with him. And then he said some things that I was like, Sean, dude, that's over the line, man. You check yourself. And again, he came at it like he was swinging and lumped me in with people that he clearly hates, has no respect for. One of our other friends even chimed in. He's like, hey, Sean, a lot of people were in the room with us when we all got together. Some people didn't, some people may have agreed with you on, in this case, the presidential level. A lot of people in that room didn't. Are you saying we're all, he's got plenty of pejoratives every day. There's a half a dozen or more posts that he puts up about how much he hates Democrats and, leaving aside the fact that not everybody he's talking about is a Democrat or a liberal, but that's a whole other conversation. But just assuming people who aren't in his particular tribe are terrible and awful, and he's got plenty of curse words for them, and our mutual friend, who's a really dear, dear friend of mine, lifelong, I consider him a best friend, just pointed out, like, Sean, half that room, people didn't vote the same way you did, if not more. Are we all what you're talking about? I thought we all had a good time. Is it possible? Like he made some really good points. Is it possible that we can get along even if we don't vote the same way? Or is everybody worthy of your hatred and your ire? That didn't go well. So the line in that instance was when we were going through the fires that day. He, again, a half dozen posts. A dude who's lived in Jersey his whole life, all of a sudden, within the span of an hour, seemed to become an expert in California fire policy, and it was awful. I was like, Sean, listen, people, The fires are still burning. People are losing their homes. Can you just freaking save it? Can you just wait for one day? You know? And it was clear that what he was doing was just regurgitating a bunch of stuff he was hearing on whatever shows he's listening to. But I just thought, man, just remember your own humanity, let alone other people's humanity. People are losing their homes. People are being displaced and there's still so much uncertainty. Dude, where's your humanity? So that was the point where I finally just had to draw the line. I don't know exactly where that line is. I've done it before. I shared a couple last year. There were such grave differences over what was happening in Israel. One person was telling me if he was basically repeating the Trump line, if I don't vote for Trump, then I'm a bad Jew. I'm like, dude, you're first of all, you're Goyish. You have no idea about me and my history. My family's history is Jews, or my family in Israel. So it went back and forth so many times, and I found myself getting so upset, and the conversation wasn't going in a healthy direction, and it just wasn't something that I could work in a healthy way with. So that was another line that was crossed. I wish I could give you, a formula for saying this is where the line is and this is how you figure it out for yourself. I can't. What I'm saying though is sometimes there is a line somewhere that a person crosses. And listen, maybe for you, it's they voted for Trump or they voted for Kamala in this last election, or that might be it for you. I would hope that that's not the case. That they voted one way on one line of their ballot isn't that line. I would hope that's not the case. But listen, it's for some people it is. They can't go there. At least for a time. They need to stay in a safe space, if you will. But for a lot of us, it is worth trying to figure out where is that line for you when this conversation or this relationship is destructive for me and for that person, and realistically for the people around us too. Because if I'm in this conversation with somebody and I'm only getting upset about it, getting angry and depressed and all these, then it's affecting the people that I'm around all the time too. That's not fair. That's not right. It's not good for me. Again, I'm not being effective with that person. So I got to know where that line is. So the tool is try to pay attention to where that line is for you. And sometimes you do have to cut somebody off. Sometimes you do have to unfriend them or even block them. And the way I think of it is, again, dude, I still love you. I'm going to love you, but I'm going to love you from way over here. I'm going to love you from a safe distance. So pay attention to what that line is for you. The last thing I'll say is equip yourself. There's plenty. I've mentioned certain resources here. Monica Guzman's book. I never thought of it that way. David Brooks's book, How to Know a Person. Load up on this stuff instead of tuning into, going into doom scrolls. Maybe take some time and read a book. Most people can read these books in a couple hours, 4 or 5 hours max, and it's good. It's good for your brain. It's good for your soul. So those are a couple. A couple others too. Maybe get involved in great organizations. I've talked about the Village Square, great friend of mine now. We've become great friends through doing this work together. Liz Joyner started the Village Square in 2006. The Village Square is a nonprofit organization. They have these talks. They do dinners. They have one special set of events they do throughout the year called the God Squad, where they get a panel of clergy, Jewish person, Christian, different denominations. She even had atheist person on these panels, like people from all different backgrounds and belief systems on the God Squad, dealing with big questions, sometimes very present in the now types of questions from a religious perspective, but having different religions and non-observance, non-religious people, their views represented. There are online events, so there are events that you can, watch online. I'm recording this on a Wednesday. There's one tomorrow night, 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. But just the Village Square, villagesquare.us, villagesquare.us. My favorite story is Liz at one point shut down downtown Tallahassee, I'm sure with the permission of the city, but shut down downtown Tallahassee, set up 100 coffee tables, had a conservative and a liberal, or a Democrat and a Republican on each side of each of these 100 coffee tables, and said, okay, here are the topics, and here's one or two ground rules, ready, go. And a Democrat and a Republican had to talk to each other. Republican or a conservative and liberal had to talk to each other. And they had some, they had some help. They had some loose guidelines, and it was great. It was just talking to our neighbors, you know. The other thing you could do with Village Square is you could volunteer to build one in your own hometown. Get involved, tune into these conversations, you know, whether you're online or if you're in Florida, go check it out live. Or you can get involved in the organization and see if you want to build a chapter there. Another great organization is Braver Angels, braverangels.org. Actually, Monica, who wrote the book, I Never Thought of It That Way, is one of the leaders, and she actually hosts the podcast that Braver Angels does. But just to sum up who Braver Angels, what they're doing, this is from their website. Braver Angels is leading the nation's largest cross-partisan, volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide for the good of our democratic republic. Coming out of the election, we're bringing together we the people to find a hopeful alternative to toxic politics. The American Hope Campaign is equipping Americans across the political spectrum to work together and demand the same of politicians from both parties. So again, they do have sessions. They actually have a SoCal events here in SoCal where there are workshops to help to equip us that are interested in this kind of thing, that are interested in having more healthy civic conversations in our public squares, in our respective village squares, in our own towns, and with our own neighbors and family. Great organization. So equip yourself. There's plenty. If you're interested in this kind of thing, equip yourself, and you can continue to get better at having these types of conversations. So that's 7. I'll give you one more just for extra credit. Take care of yourself. Like I said, I'm trying to fit in a workout. That's part of me taking care of myself. You could get caught up in the work and exhaust yourself and burn out. But for me, I've developed a toolbox to help stay healthy mentally, physically, emotionally, in all kinds of ways. And yeah, that's the extra credit. Take care of yourself. I've talked about that before. Maybe there's another time when we'll go into that a little bit more deeply. But those are the 7 things. Again, give yourself grace, permission to screw up, but learn from it. Keep moving forward. Proper expectations. Not everybody's going to want to have these conversations. And any given conversation, any given relationship, you might not be able to persuade somebody by 180 degrees, but maybe by 1 degree. And you can maybe be persuaded by 1 degree. Instead of having a bunch of knowledge, have a bunch of questions. Be radically curious. Storytelling. When you allow someone to tell their story, you're seeing them as a human being and they're being seen as a full human being. Storytelling. And then your disposition, as opposed to being a contentious disposition where you're going to fight with that person, debate with that person, contest with that person, leave room for, have the disposition of arriving at that point where you say, I never thought of it that way. Like the title of Monica's book. I never thought of it that way. Recognize where your line is. There's a line somewhere. No when it's time to love somebody from far away. Recognizing where your line is, and then equip yourself. There's plenty of books to read, organizations to be a part of. I just mentioned a few of them, and the extra credit would be to take care of yourself. So that's more than enough, I guess. The 7 habits of highly effective people. These are 7 habits of engaging with them. That's what I was thinking of. I'm sure we can revisit this and see if we edit this list, add to this list, take away from this list, but keep on working at it. So thanks for listening. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write that review. And now you can watch these conversations on YouTube, support us on Patreon. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. And Patreon is patreon.com/politicsandreligion. Have those links in the show notes as well. Your support really does make a difference. So thank you for all of it. Now go talk some politics and religion, but with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.